Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Ahmed Saeed and welcome back to Knowledge Realm. Students, we are studying pre-partition history of Pakistan from the book Trek to Pakistan by Ahmed Saeed. This book is recommended by FPSC also, so we are studying all these lectures, all these topics from the book recommended by FPSC. The two topics that we're going to cover today are Nehru Report of 1928 and Jinnah's 14 Points of 1929. Before starting the lectures, students, I'm definitely sure that all of you have must learned these topics in your elementary education. In schools, students learn these topics, Nehru Report and Jinnah's 14 Points in Pakistan studies in pre-partition history of Pakistan. But unfortunately, I'm very sorry to say this, that teachers in schools do not explain these topics very well. Students are just required to memorize these topics and reproduce the knowledge in exams. So this is the reason that we do not know much about these topics. We do not understand much about Jinnah's 14 Points or Nehru Report. But today's students, we are not just studying these two topics for the sake of exam, but we're going to try to understand these topics. I tried to make it simple and easy for you, and I've added all the authentic knowledge from the book Trek to Pakistan. So without wasting time, stay focused and let's get started. So starting with the brief introduction of Nehru Report. Nehru Report is a very important document in the constitutional history of India. It was actually a response to the challenge extended by Lord Birkenhead, who was the Secretary of State of India at the time. Secretary of State of India, Lord Birkenhead, stated it very satirically that why don't Indians design a constitution for themselves? So it was a challenge from Lord Birkenhead. Indians accepted that challenge and a committee was appointed by the All Parties Conference in India afterwards. Motilal Nehru was appointed as head of the committee and Jawaharlal Nehru became the secretary of the committee. This committee presented the report, and this report actually presented a constitution for India. This report and the constitution was required to stipulate the rights of Muslims and other minorities as well. But the report failed at doing this, and the report was rejected by Muslim leaders and Muslim population as well. And in response, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah gave his famous 14 points. So this was the brief introduction of Nehru Report. It was a kind of constitution for India, and it was compiled when Lord Birkenhead challenged Indians to produce a constitution for themselves. Now students, we are going to study the detailed story of Nehru Report. We're going to start. Students, then All Parties Conference was held on February 12, 1928. It was called as a result of acceptance of Birkenhead challenge. Major political parties of India such as Hindu Mahasabha, All India Muslim League, Central Khilafat Committee and Central Sikh League attended the conference, and all the major politicians of India attended the conference. For example, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Nawab Ismail Khan, Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar, Motilal Nehru, Pandit Madan Mohan. I've attached pictures of these leaders here. We know Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. This is the respected Nawab Ismail Khan, then Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar, then Motilal Nehru, then Pandit Madan Mohan. These are some of the political leaders of India who attended this conference. Alright, so this conference was held to make consensus on producing the constitution for India, because Birkenhead challenged these leaders to make a constitution for themselves. So all the political leaders, all the political parties of India got united and a conference was held on February 12, 1928. Then the conference appointed a committee on February 28, 1928. This committee was given the task of formation of a constitution. Then, to settle conflicts between Muslims and non-Muslims, two subcommittees were also appointed. But these two subcommittees had not been able to complete the task within the given time. Then a small committee was appointed to prepare the constitution. Motilal Nehru was appointed as the head of this small committee, and Jawaharlal Nehru became the secretary of this committee. This committee prepared a report, and this report was called Nehru Report. Well, actually, this report was supposed to be the Constitution of India. For Motilal Nehru and for Jawaharlal Nehru, it was the Constitution of India. They presented the Constitution of India in terms of Nehru Report. Alright students, here are the salient features of the report. Nehru Report. The small committee appointed by the All Parties Conference prepared, compiled and presented the report, which was called Nehru Report. This report actually gave the Constitution for India. So here are the salient features of the report. I'll try to explain these salient features in very simple terms. So the first feature was that the report stipulated that India would be a complete responsible government, but within the ambit of dominion status of British Empire. Now students, when Birkenhead gave the challenge to Indian politicians, they held the conference, and the first controversy that erupted in the conference was on the question of either complete responsible government or dominion status for India. Now, what is a dominion status? Students, dominion status was actually invented by British Empire itself, and British Empire used to give this status to its colonies and the territories that were under British control. Dominion status means that the territory is definitely not under British control. It has its own self-government. It is not subordinate of British Empire, but still it is somehow related to British Empire. Dominion means which is mastered or ruled. This term was used by British to describe its colonial territories. It means that the territory is somehow related to British Empire and has some allegiance to British Empire. So this was the first controversy that divided the conference into two groups. Some people were saying that India should be a complete responsible government and it should not be subservient to British Empire in any matter, but some of them were saying that it should be a dominion status. So Nehru Report presented that India would be a complete responsible government, but within the ambit of dominion status. What does it mean? It means that India would not be completely independent, but it would have some relation with British Empire. This was the first thing that was not liked by Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Then, next point, Nehru Report actually rejected the demand of safeguards of Muslims. The book Trek to Pakistan by Ahmed Saeed explains that the Nehru Committee tried to distort and manipulate the proportion of India, and it gave the wrong statistics of population of Muslims in India, and it used the argument that Muslims in many provinces of India, that is Sindh, NWFP and Punjab, are in majority. They are in majority in these provinces, so there is no need to give protection or safeguard the majority in province. They are in majority, so they can protect their rights themselves. There is no need to give them protection. This was the argument, claim of Nehru Committee on rejecting the demand of safeguard for Muslims. Then Nehru declared the separate electorate injurious for the minorities. Once again, it rejected the right of separate electorates for Muslims. It stated that the right of separate electorate incites and it instills the sectarian conflict and the feeling of nationalism in minorities. It causes disintegration among minorities in India, so there is no need to give the right of separate electorate to any minority in India, but there should be joint electorates only. The report claimed, since separate electorate awakens communal sentiments, therefore it should be scrapped and joint electorate should be introduced. This was the main argument behind the rejection of the right of separate electorate in Nehru Report. Then the committee ignored the demand of seat reservation in Punjab and Bengal for underprivileged Muslims. Nehru actually argued that in Punjab and Bengal, Muslims are in majority. So there is no need to reserve seats for majority in those provinces. But students, Shoaib Qureshi was also part of this committee. So he tried to defend Muslims of Punjab and Bengal. Shoaib Qureshi presented his thesis and he said that despite being a majority, Muslims of Punjab and Bengal are poor, they are uneducated, they are illiterate, so they cannot present themselves in assemblies. They cannot come to the forefront and they cannot protect their rights. So there should be definitely reservation of seats in Punjab and Bengal for Muslims, but Nehru Report rejected this demand also. Then the Nehru Committee deliberated on the question of separation of Sindh from Bombay at length. It did not show a clear stance on the question of separation of Sindh from Bombay, but it presented some conditions and said that if these conditions are fulfilled, we should separate Sindh from Bombay. It said that Sindh should attain financial autarky and a vast majority of Sindhis accepted to bear the financial responsibilities, and Sindh would have the same system of government as would be guaranteed under constitution for other provinces, and non-Muslim minorities in Sindh would have same rights and privileges as Muslim minority in other provinces. Nehru Report said that if these four conditions are fulfilled, then yes, we should separate Sindh from Bombay Presidency. So these were the salient features of the report, the Nehru Report of 1928. Now students, here are the rest of the salient features of the Nehru Report. Students, one of the positive point of Nehru Report was that it accepted that yes, there should be constitutional reforms in NWFP and Balochistan, and Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah from the very outset demanded these constitutional reforms in these two provinces for Muslims. Then the demand of Muslims of giving 1/3 representation in the central legislature was rejected by Nehru Committee. Nehru Committee stated that Muslims do not constitute 1/3 population of India. They are less than 1/4 proportion of India, so they should not be given 1/3 representation in the central legislature. Instead, they should be given 1/4 representation in the central legislature. But this again was rejected by Shoaib Qureshi, who was part of Nehru Committee at the time. Then Nehru Report proposed a unitary form of government, making the central government all powerful. Once again students, this point was not liked by Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. All Muslims rejected this point because we know that India was multi-ethnic. So India needed a federal type of government in which provinces are strong, provinces are autonomous. But no, Nehru Report actually tried to make a strong Hindu government in India. It proposed a unitary form of government, and it gave all the powers to central government, making provinces weak. All the residuary power were also given to central government, and this was the point that was not liked by Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah and all other Muslim leaders of India. Now students, let's analyze this Nehru Report of 1928. Let's try to understand that what kind of message this report gave and what were the realization of Muslim leaders after this report. What understanding did Muslim leaders make of the nature of Hindus analyzing this Nehru Report? Students, Nehru Report actually presented interest of Hindus only. It rejected all the demands of Muslims. It rejected the demand of one-third representation of Muslims in central legislature. It rejected the right of separate electorates for Muslims in India. It rejected all the demands of Muslims. It wanted a strong Hindu Raj in India, and it rejected the fact that India is multi-ethnic, and Nehru Report presented a unitary form of government when India very clearly needed a federal government. India needed maximum autonomy for provinces. Federal type of government was indispensable in India, but Nehru Report, Nehru Committee, keeping this in mind that there should be Hindu Raj in India, presented a unitary form of government. So, this report showed that Hindus have been indifferent towards Muslims from the very outset. It showed that Hindus do not want to give any written guarantee to Muslims for their protection. They made only verbal promises that yes, Muslims would be protected in India under Hindu government, but they were not ready to give any written guarantee in the constitution for Muslims. They were not ready to accept any demand of Muslims in the constitution. They rejected the right of separate electorate. They rejected their demand of one-third presentation in central legislature. So it shows that Hindus were not interested in protecting Muslims at all, but they were just interested in making a stronghold of Hindus in India. Alright students, now we're gonna study the reaction of Muslims on the report. Well, the reaction was as it was expected. Muslims reacted negatively. They reacted very sharply. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the leader of Muslims at the time, did not accept the report. He stated, "I'm against this report. I consider it prejudicial to the interest of the Muslims." Then he gave his proposals. He gave some amendments to the report. He demanded that all the demands of Muslims should be accepted. But unfortunately, the proposals were rejected very blatantly. All the Muslim politicians rejected the report and they reacted very sharply. The Muslim population also reacted very sharply. Then, on March 12, 1929, the Nehru Report came up for debate in the Central Legislative Assembly. Quaid-e-Azam, along with all other Muslim members, opposed it tooth and nail. Muslim print media also launched campaign against it, and Muslim in entire India tried to react negatively on this report. Now a very interesting thing, students, note here that Jamiatul Ulama Hind, that took side of Congress from the very beginning, also rejected the report. This organization also realized that this report is detrimental to the interest of Muslims. So this organization also did not take side with the Nehru Committee, with the Congress, and it rejected the report. The Hindu themselves recognized the strong opposition of the Muslims to the report. Subhash Chandra Bose admitted that the Nehru Report has lost its importance because of the reaction of Muslims. So this is how Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah tried to protect the interest of Muslims in India. He and all other Muslim politicians rejected this report, and they expressed their disappointment, they expressed their grief over this report. Now students, we are going to study the impacts of Nehru Report of 1928. Well students, Nehru Report actually proved to be a blessing in disguise. If we study the impacts of this report, we would understand, we would realize that yes, it was a blessing for Muslims. It was a blessing in disguise. Students, Muslims got united in their ranks and files after the presentation of this Nehru Report. I explained it in the previous slide that Jamiatul Ulama Hind, that was an organization of ulama of India that always sided with Congress, took side of Quaid-e-Azam and All India Muslim League in the matter of this Nehru Report. This organization rejected the Nehru Report and sided with All India Muslim League. So Muslims were united in their ranks and files. Jinnah League and Shafi League also dissolved, and All India Muslim League was reunited again. Then Muslims girded up their loins to protect their rights and interest in India, because they knew that Hindus do not have very good intentions for Muslims in India. Muslims lost all trust in Hindu leaders. The report made Muslims realize that there is no possibility of Hindu-Muslim unity. Before this Nehru Report, before Simon Commission, Muslim leaders and Hindu leaders were trying to unite Hindus and Muslims. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah gave Delhi Muslim proposals that was also a formula for Hindu-Muslim unity. But after Nehru Report, the Muslims realized that Hindu-Muslim unity is not possible at all. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was called Ambassador of Hindu-Muslim Unity by Sarojini Naidu, he stopped being the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. And then he also realized that the unity of these two different nations is not possible. Another impact of the Nehru Report is that Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah gave his 14 points in response to this report, and the 14 points led to the independence of Pakistan. So these were some of the impacts of Nehru Report 1928. Alright students, we have studied the Nehru Report of 1928. We studied this report in detail. We studied the background of the report, why it was presented, who challenged Indian leaders, and what was the situation of society at the time, what made Indian leaders realize that they should constitute, they should formulate their own constitution. We studied this in detail. Then we studied Nehru Report, what was the All Parties Conference of 1928, and why the committee was appointed, who were the member of the committee. Motilal Nehru was the chairperson of the committee, and Jawaharlal Nehru was the secretary. Then we studied the salient features of Nehru, and we studied it that unfortunately Nehru Report rejected all the demands of Muslims, and it showed that Hindus are indifferent towards Muslims. And then we studied how Muslim leaders and Muslim population reacted to the report and what were the impacts of this report. Now students, we are going to study the second topic of today's lecture, that is Jinnah's 14 points. Students, I tried to explain Nehru Report very diligently, and I hope that all the listeners understood my point. Now I'm going to explain Jinnah's 14 point. I tried to make it simple for you. So we're going to start with the introduction of Jinnah's 14 points. The introduction is very simple. Well, these 14 points were presented by Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and in these points, Quaid-e-Azam presented the demands of Muslims. These points were presented as a response to Nehru Report in 1928. Quaid-e-Azam had realized that Hindus would never speak in favor of Muslims and Hindus would never try to protect the rights of Muslims. He realized that Hindus are indifferent towards Muslims. So he presented the demands of Muslims, and these were called Jinnah's 14 points. So let's study these 14 points in detail. Starting with the background of Jinnah's 14 points, students, the Nehru Committee that was appointed to prepare a constitution for India made an unsuccessful attempt to prepare a constitution for India. In Nehru Report, the committee showed complete indifference towards the interest of Muslims of India. It rejected all the demands of Muslims of India. It rejected the demand of separate electorate. It rejected the demand of 1/3 representation of Muslims in central legislature, and it rejected the demand of seat reservation in Punjab and Bengal. It rejected all the interests and rights of Muslims in India. Then Muslims reacted sharply at the report. Muslims rejected this report. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah and all other politicians, Muslim politicians of India, rejected this report. This report changed the mentality of Quaid-e-Azam and he stopped being ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. Then Quaid-e-Azam said, "From now onwards, this is the parting of the ways." Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah called a meeting in March 1929 and Shafi League and Jinnah League resolved and All India Muslim League got united once again and the meeting was called in March 1929. Quaid-e-Azam presented some demands of Muslims in this meeting and these demands were called Jinnah's 14 points. Now students, here are the Jinnah's 14 points. I tried to explain these points and I tried to make it simple for you so that all of you can memorize it easily. Well, for CSS perspective, CSS examination, there is no need to memorize it word by word, but you should have an idea that what Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah presented and what he demanded in these 14 points. So starting with the point number 1. Students, unlike Nehru Report, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah said that there should be federal government in India with all residual powers vested in provinces. Well, we have studied in the previous slides that India was multi-ethnic, and in a multi-ethnic state, you cannot run a unitary government. You need to have a federal government where there is a representation of all the communities in the provinces and the provinces can rule themselves in the way they want. A state of multi-ethnicity cannot be run by a unitary form of government. Then second point, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah demanded that there should be autonomy of provinces. Provinces should be given more powers so that there would be harmony and there would be freedom of rule in provinces in a state that is multi-ethnic. Students, remember that if the state is not multi-ethnic, unitary government would do good. But if the state is multi-ethnic, unitary government would not be able to rule very good. Instead, it would resemble a dictatorial regime. Then, third point, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah stated that educated and effective representation should be given to all the minorities in all the assemblies and all other elected bodies of the country, and no effort should be made by any territorial redistribution to reduce the majority of a community in a province to minority or even equality. Students, this point is very interesting and very important. Try to understand it. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah here is trying to protect the rights of minorities. He is speaking to support minorities, at the behalf of minorities. He is saying that representation should be given to all minorities in all the assemblies and all other elected bodies of the country. Furthermore, he is saying that no effort should be made by any territorial redistribution to reduce the majority of a community in a province to minority or even equality. He is trying to say that there should be no territorial redistribution that changes a majority into minority. Can anyone of you recall an event that changed majority of a province into minority? Well, the merging of border of Sindh with Bombay changed the majority of Muslims in Sindh into minority. This is the reason Quaid-e-Azam demanded the separation of Sindh from Bombay Presidency. So in point number 3, Quaid-e-Azam is talking about the rights of minorities, and he's saying that minorities should be given adequate and effective representation in all the assemblies and all other elected bodies so that their rights are protected and they are not suppressed in the India. Then in 4th point, Quaid-e-Azam is saying that 1/3 seats should be reserved in central legislature for Muslims. Now, this is the demand that was rejected by Nehru in Nehru Report. Quaid-e-Azam presented this demand once again in front of the government that 1/3 seats should be reserved for Muslims in central legislature so that Muslims could protect themselves, Muslims could preserve their rights in India. Then in point number 5, Quaid-e-Azam is saying that the representation of communal groups should continue to be by means of separate electorate as at present. Here he is talking about separate electorate. Students, we studied in Minto Model Reforms of 1909 that in 1909 British government accepted the request of separate electorate from Muslims and they were given the right of separate electorate. So here Quaid-e-Azam is demanding that the right of separate electorate should be kept intact. Then in point number 6, Quaid-e-Azam is saying any territorial redistribution that might at any time be necessary should not in any way affect the Muslim majority in Bengal, Northwest Front Province and the Punjab. Now here once again Quaid-e-Azam is trying to protect the rights of Muslims. He's saying that there should be no territorial redistribution that could affect the Muslim majority of Bengal, Northwest Frontier Province and the Punjab, because he knew that in the past British Empire redistributed the territories of Sindh and it merged Sindh with Bombay, and the majority of Sindh was the Muslim majority of Sindh was converted into minority. So this is the reason that Quaid-e-Azam here is trying to make sure that no such territorial redistribution takes place again. Then in 7, it is a very interesting, very important point, a fundamental right of a human being, full religious liberty to all people of India. This is Quaid-e-Azam demanding not just for Muslims, not just for Sikh or any other religion, but for all people of India. Then point number 8, no bill or resolution nor any part thereof should be passed in any legislative or elected body if 3/4 of the members of a community directly affected by that bill or resolution oppose it. This is very interesting, students. Here Quaid-e-Azam is trying to make sure that no bill or resolution is passed in any legislative or elected body if the community that is affected by that bill opposes the bill. He's trying to make sure that no community passes a bill against any other community. Then in point number 9, once again Quaid-e-Azam is demanding that Sindh should be separated from the Bombay Presidency and constituted into a separate province so that the Muslim majority of Sindh has its own province. Then number 10, reforms should also be introduced in the NWFP and Balochistan on the same footing as in other provinces. Now here reforms mean constitutional reforms. Quaid-e-Azam wanted introduction of legislative assemblies in NWFP and Balochistan. Students remember it that there were no constitutional assemblies in NWFP and Balochistan, and Quaid-e-Azam wanted these legislative assemblies in these two provinces. Then point number 11, Quaid-e-Azam is saying that Muslims should be given due share in all the services of the state and in self-governing bodies. Now here, students, Quaid-e-Azam is trying to protect Muslims against discrimination. Quaid-e-Azam is trying to make sure that Muslims get their due share in services of the state, and Muslims are not being discriminated like they used to get discriminated after War of Independence. This is again something related to rights of Muslims. Then in point number 12, Quaid-e-Azam is saying the Constitution should embody adequate safeguards for the protection of Muslim. Here, students, Quaid-e-Azam is demanding protection of Muslim religion, culture, personal law, and he is demanding that there would be promotion of Muslim education, language, religion, personal law, and there would be Muslim charitable institutions and everything that can benefit Muslims in India. And Muslims should live in India peacefully. Then students, in point number 13, Quaid-e-Azam is saying that Muslims should be involved in all central and provincial cabinet with the proportion of 1/3. Then students, in point number 14, Quaid-e-Azam is saying no change or amendment should be made in the constitution by the central legislature except with the concurrence of the states constituting the Indian Federation. He's saying that central legislature should not be authorized to change or amend constitution without the consent of the states that constitute the Indian Federation. There should be the consensus of states if there is a need of changing or amending the Constitution of India. Students, I've tried to explain these 14 points. I've tried to make it simple for you, and I hope that all of you understood it very well. Students, now here try to analyze the 14 points of Quaid-e-Azam. In these 14 points, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah tried to protect the rights of minorities. He tried to protect the rights of Muslims, and he was a very foresighted person. And he gave the idea of federal government for India because this was the appropriate way to rule India. He advocated autonomy for provinces, and he talked about the 1/3 representation of Muslims in central legislature because he knew that this way Muslims can protect their rights in India. So the be-all and end-all of Jinnah's 14 points was the protection of rights of Muslims in India. I've tried to explain it, and I hope that all of you understood these 14 points very well. Now we're going to move. Students, let's study the reaction of Hindus on Jinnah's 14 points. Well, their reaction was as it was expected. They reacted negatively. They did not like the points, and they rejected the points. Students, before the presentation of 14 points, Gandhi told Jinnah that he would get approved from Congress whatever Jinnah proposes. But after the presentation of 14 points, Gandhi said that in his personal capacity he was ready to accept everything, but he could not guarantee the approval of these points from the Congress. Almost all Hindu leaders rejected the points. Dr. B.S. Munj, who was the leader of Hindu Mahasabha, declared these points to be contrary to the spirit of Indian nationalism. He asserted that these points are sectarian and communal in nature. He said that these points are an attempt to create disintegration and to create division between Hindus and Muslims. So all Hindu leaders rejected these points, and Hindu press strongly criticized the points. Now students, let's study the impacts of Jinnah's 14 points. Well, the impacts were good. The points rejuvenated the unity among Muslims. Students, when Qaid Muhammad Ali Jinnah and other 30 Muslim leaders presented Delhi Muslim proposals, All India Muslim League got divided into two. It divided into two groups. One was Jinnah League, those who agreed with Jinnah, and the other was Shafi League, those who agreed with Mia Muhammad Shafi. So at this point in 1929, Shafi League and Jinnah League, these two leagues were dissolved, and All India Muslim League was united once again. Then the reaction of Hindus on the points revealed the true intentions of Hindus. It made Muslims realize that Hindus never in any case thought of the betterment of Muslims. Hindus kept assuring Muslims verbally of their security, and they used to make verbal promises that yes, Muslims would be safe, they would be protected in Hindu Raj, but they were not ready to incorporate their interest and their rights in the constitution. They were not ready to write anything legally in the constitution because they had some evil intentions. I mean, this is the guess that we can make at the acts of Hindus. Then Hindus and Muslims were disunited for good, and these points made a foundation for Pakistan movement. So these were the impacts of Jinnah's 14 points. Students, this is the end of this lecture today. We studied Nehru Report and Jinnah's 14 points. We studied these topics in detail from the book Trek to Pakistan. I tried my best to explain these two topics, and I hope that today all of you understood whatever I explained here. I tried to make it simple for you guys. I tried to make it easy and easy to memorize these things. So this is the end of this lecture today. In the next lecture, we would study Allahabad Address of 1930. Till then, stay focused on your studies, stay focused on your goals, and stay focused on whatever you have decided for your future. Study hard, and Allah Hafiz. Thank you, and don't forget to subscribe the channel.